Welcome to A Scrap Life, a podcast solely focused on the hustlers, grinders, operators, and business owners who live and breathe the scrap metal industry every day. We are the original recyclers. No suits required, just guts and hard work. Here is your host, Brett Eckhart.
What's going on, everybody? Another exciting episode of Bulls versus Bears. I got the man Chad. He's going to break the market down for us. Today, I'm going to try to argue with him that the market should be, I think, sideways. He's going to tell me pound sand, I think. But I'll just see what he has to say. He's going to bust out some charts for us and let us know what he knows. So, what's up, Chad? How's things going, man?
Man, it's just the sun is shining. It's just a beautiful day out. I don't know what it is about summertime and bear markets, but it sure makes me feel good.
It sure makes you feel good. On the buy side, right? The sellers over here, us poor, lonely, scrap guys, just trying to make a living, trying to keep the lights on, and you bears are just nothing, no good news for us. But I guess there's no time like the present. So
tell me, how is your scrap flow?
Dude, it's slow. And you know what? This is one of those times, like, in all seriousness, I don't think anybody cares what the scrap flow is because I feel like the price is coming down and they're like, flow, like, it doesn't really matter. Like, whether you can place the tons you got, it feels like a challenge. That's at least the feeling I'm getting. But the reality of it is, like, for us, it's still kind of into spring, like we're getting into summer now over here in Idaho and in the Northwest, really, in general. So our flow had picked up, but I don't know, like, it's still the industrial market is slowed down. Your drop boxes, your bins, that pickup. I feel like manufacturing has definitely slowed down. So, but in general, we do see more volume this time of year. But, I guess you're about to tell us if we're going to be able to sell that volume or if we're going to have to sit on it for a while.
I think it's I think I finally have the clarity this month for the first time in a decade, in that I've had a lot of conversations with a lot of scrap folks where when the market's hot, and it's like they're talking about, I talk about steel demand. They're like, Chad, it doesn't matter. It's just all about flow, right?
Yeah.
But when the market's going down, people say it doesn't matter about flow. It's all about demand. So I finally got that clarity. It's not chicken versus egg. It's just, is the market up or is the market down? Because if the market's down, your flow doesn't matter. If the market's going up, that's when your flow matters.
That's when the flow matters. And like, it's when the market's going up, the flow matters because you're trying to get it processed and get it moved and try and take advantage, right? And I was gonna make a post about this the other day, and I really want people to understand, like, this is kind of like a kind of veer off to the left. We'll come back, but scrap flow, the importance of scrap flow relies heavily on your transportation. So never discount the importance of transportation in your company. Like, logistics is probably the biggest piece of scrap that doesn't necessarily get discussed as much as it should, as like supply, demand, steel mills, export, this and that. Like, your ability to control your inflow and outflow is heavily relied upon is trucks and trains and movements, right? So ships, if you're on the export side. So logistics will help you control your flow. It helps you get to the end of the month. You can get your material delivered, helps you bring material in. And so back to flow, it matters. Control your logistics, and I think you got a good chance to kind of manage that inflow and outflow.
Well, I watched one of your posts from, I don't know if it was earlier this week or last, but you talked about, I never heard this term before, but the velocity of scrap.
Yeah.
And I thought, man, isn't that true? And that even when I tell my friends that know nothing about scrap, what makes you good at scrap? It's like, well, you really have to understand logistics. And like, well, I don't get it. I'm like, well, you're buying and selling something that's for $300, $400, $500 a ton. I mean, that scrap proponent is a huge percentage piece, right?
Yeah.
Versus copper or a widget. And so that's where, yeah, I'm with you 100%. Logistics is super important.
My biggest advice for people is control your logistics, and you got a fighting chance. I mean, you're never gonna control the price of scrap. You can negotiate $5-10 here, maybe a ton, but the reality of it is, like, your ability to deliver what you can sell, your ability to bring in what you can buy. I mean, obviously there's the processing component in the middle, but your logistics is huge, man. So,
and that's very, it's very true when you're in the middle of Idaho. You know, it's probably a less of an impact when you're in like a St. Louis market or somewhere where you have, you know, several modes, or Ohio, you got, you know, 6 mills and within a really close range. But for your entity, it's everything, because
yeah.
you know,
That's why I got damn pictures of trucks and everywhere. Like, you know, I'm not as much of like a truck guy as my dad was, but the older I've gotten, I've understood the value of transporting your scrap. You know, the value of getting it delivered and having, you know, good homes for it and being able to deliver to those spots. So I'll say that going into the pricing and whatnot, I was talking to my DJJ guy over here this last month, and he quoted me the price, and I couldn't even negotiate. I was like, fuck, you got me. I was like, I didn't even try. I felt like he was probably anticipating me to negotiate, and I just was like, whatever, just book the sale. Like, let's go. Let's keep it moving, you know, like. I'm sure he probably was like, oh, maybe that wasn't as painful as it sometimes can be. But I was like, all right. And I felt like, you know, he had kind of had me by the nuts at that in that conversation. I'm like, hey, you got me. Price is down. Like, nothing I can say. Like, it feels like that's the way it is. So what's it looking like in June, man? Let's
so let's talk about a few charts. But first, I mean, so I'll let you lead. Do you want to talk about the bull parts or the bearish parts first?
I want to talk about, let's go bull first.
All right. So you ready? I got all my bull points.
Yeah, like, well, let's go. Okay.
All right, we're gonna move on.
Hey, you saw copper bounce today, though, right? We got it back in the 370s. I feel like there's, you know, there could be a storm on the horizon, like a good storm. So if Dr. Copper comes back into play, maybe we got a chance.
So tell me, copper, that was 370 today.
Yeah,
right? Is what it bounced to.
Yeah.
So no doubt this chart was taken yesterday at 363. And I think if we jump into 373, you can argue that we've broken the downtrend. So there you go. You're right. We do got one bull
point. I knew that chart was going to get pulled out because the trend of copper and the trend of oil and everything it's not our friend at this stage in the game.
Yeah, so I want to. Usually, we don't talk about the Dow Jones Industrial Average, and for the listeners, we're looking at a chart, and very much that downtrend is intact. When you agree,
yeah.
And so, and to your point, you said some of your industrial counts are a little slower. It sure does feel over the last 30 for sure, even the last 60, that we are actually feeling like we could be heading towards a recession.
I think, to be fairly honest, I think that probably the last, like, really in 2023 and maybe the end of 2022, we've really saw a slowdown on the manufacturing side. You know, and I think and part of that is because people have got caught up maybe on some inventory items, and people have, you know, kind of, there was a mad push to fulfill some orders on the manufacturing side that were placed up to a year and a half ago, right? I mean, we still have forklifts that we haven't taken delivery on, and we've been almost 2 years out now, like, 18 months. So I feel like once that has caught up, you're starting to see whether it's a normalization or a true downtrend in manufacturing, it's here. And on the scrap side, you know, the guys with the boxes and bins and everybody else out there, we usually see it before anybody else because we see it in, you know, the volume that we're receiving. You can only be so efficient at manufacturing a widget. I mean, if you're generating less scrap, I don't think you just got that much more efficient at, you know, on your plaza table. Like you're just making less widgets, you know.
Well, that's a great point when you think about the lead times for anything you buy. I mean, they're not as bad as, you know, post COVID, but they're still not what they were pre COVID.
Yeah.
And so that, I think that's why it feels like it mentally, the slowdown is taking longer than like what is actually felt out there. But that's a great point about lead times.
All right, next great positive point that you have for us, Chad.
All right, I do got. What do you think about this crude oil chart? So we're only down. We're around $72 last month. This month we're around, you know, $68, 5.5% decline. But boy, this one doesn't look too pretty either.
That one went in a hurry too, right? I mean, this is why I don't trade commodities for a living, at least not like a lot of commodities. I bet Nick in our Recyclado podcast that copper would be over $4. I was stone cold wrong about that one. If you would have told me oil would be trading in the mid 60s, I would have said, no way. Like I didn't see that one coming. So yeah, I'm that lady in that video I posted trying to keep up with the line dance, and like I'm all over the map. Like I'm not keeping up with these trends, but it looks like it's picking up steam, man. It's not picking up steam in a very positive manner.
Yeah. And I included the blue line in this chart's the 200-day moving average. And I think that's always important to really just show the overall trend. And you can see it's very much still in the decline. So, all right. So then let's jump to the next one. Pig iron. So this is important because I feel like this is a big impact mentally. If you know, there used to be a high correlation between busheling and prime pre-COVID, pre-Russia-Ukraine war, but now it's not as much. But in any case, pig iron's down from 535-ish to 505, 510-ish. We'll call it you know, $30, $25, $30, 5%.
Mm-hmm.
But I think between this and Europe has been slower on the steel mill side too, right? Just because of natural gas costs, electric costs. And there's been a lot of, I think, rumored that there's like 400,000 tons of prime being brought in the last 3 months, and there will be again in June. So that's a lot of prime scrap. And now you got pig at a more attractive price. So I think that's going to have a huge impact.
It is, man. And ultimately, I mean, probably more of an impact on like your busheling grade, right? I mean, any of that, like stampings and stuff like that, then maybe the cut grade scrap, but it's gonna play a role for sure. I mean, what are you feeling like on your end? Are you guys seeing, I mean, is there a lot of prime material busheling scrap being even offered? Is it from an automotive standpoint, you know, you guys being operating over there in the Midwest, are the automotive plants still running hot and heavy trying to catch up to sales, or are those starting to, because I mean, like for example, the reason I asked that question is I was reading an article about the RV industry, right? I mean, and those guys are, getting crushed, right? They're putting RVs on sale like nobody's business because there's not a lot of demand for, you know, new RVs, but because automotive was so far behind because of the chips and everything else, are you guys seeing the automotive, you know, scrap becoming more and more available, or is it filling supply issues over there?
Well, when I think of automotive, I think of hot roll. And you know, funny enough, I got that lead time chart right here.
The lead time chart is back. I love it.
Yeah, so we're at like 9 weeks a month ago. Now we're in that 3 weeks.
Yeah,
I mean, this is frightening.
That's one of the charts I was showing to one of our pipe supply companies. They're like, yeah, I mean, the price could be up, and I was like, no. I was like, no, don't piss on my leg and tell me it's raining. Like, that's piss. Like, it ain't going. I said, let me show something to you that you'll appreciate. Like, let me show you how much easier it is for you to get coil than it once was.
And on that front, I mean, here's the U.S. Midwest domestic hot roll pricing. So we're right around 1135 last month. Now we're somewhere in that 935 futures, and so that's down $200 or 17%. And to me, these charts are very much correlated.
100%. It's that's not good. That's not good if you're anticipating a price spike in June or July. And really, as those lead times come down, like we discussed, I mean, kind of the opposite of what we discussed, just 2 months ago, is like, hey, lead times are stretching out. That means there's some demand. That means there's maybe some positive sentiment, and you see how fast that can turn on you. And that being said, that should motivate you on the scrap end, you to keep your scrap moved, because if it turns on you that quick, it's in your best interest to probably keep your scrap moving so you don't have to feel the full brunt of it.
And I think that's a great point. And to me, I think we've seen a lot of consolidation in a lot of different industries, but to me, this market can move up really quickly because of the consolidation, and it can move down really quickly because of the consolidation. So it just feels like we have a supply chain that, even throughout the whole system, from scrap to steel to service center, everybody wants leaner inventories. Everybody wants to, and clearly these companies have more power when they want to push pricing up, and they show the demands there, and the lack of supply. They have the fortitude and the know-how to do that. And on the downside, it feels like they can do the same.
Yeah. No, 100%. I mean, what the old saying has never been truer is escalator up and elevator down, right? Like, it's like chunk to chunk to chunk, ba-boom, right? So you got to be prepared for that one, the ba-boom. So on the way down, so you got to kind of chunk it out as you go on the way up, and not try and pick the top.
So let's switch gears to China. So this is Shanghai steel rebar, and it's down, let's say 4.5%. And this is the one thing that I still have to teach my brain is when they come back, when China comes back, production comes back, pricing falls because they're relentless about just throwing material in the market at whatever price it is.
Yeah. And go, that's just kind of a testament to how they do business, right? As a country, and I say how they do business in general, but as a country, they're more interested in moving product, moving material, than necessarily trying to create or keep margin, right? It's more just like, hey, we would rather keep our steel mills running. We'd rather keep our people working. Like, if we have to sell at these markets, like, we're going to figure out how to do it, and they'll drive that price down until somebody buys. I mean, I think that's the reality of the situation, is they'll keep going until somebody says, I'll take it at that price, type of deal.
Yeah. And obviously with Section 232, it impacts us here less in the United States, but it really impacts Turkey, because if the East Coast scrap guys, right, if the Turks can buy rebar from China, or they can, cheaper than they convert scrap into rebar, obviously they got to do what's best for their business too. So,
how does that affect the domestic rebar suppliers?
Well, I think they're protected a little bit through that Section 232 up to a percentage, right? I don't know if that's a 25 or 50% tariff, but off the top of my head, but I mean, 25% of something is, still pretty decent number.
Yeah, that's a big chunk. I mean, especially when you're talking about, usually that's going to come off of, it's going to come, for the most part. And I try and explain this to scrap suppliers in general, right? Like, they're not going to take the 25% haircut. Like they're going to give that, they're going to pass that on to you. So they're not going to split it with you. They're not going to, share the pain. Like if it's 25, like you're going to get the brunt of it on the supply side, because they're basically saying, I can go find the material from somebody else that's willing to take the 25% haircut. And I think that's what people have to know. Like, as much as I love to be positive and love to be like, hey, optimistic, this market's going to bounce. And, when you recognize that the market is softening up, like it is in your best interest to move material. Unless you're just in a space or a cash flow situation that you're like, yeah, I got a year or two to wait. Let's wait to see this thing out, see this thing through. But people have built their businesses, companies have built their businesses, especially the last couple of years, into a infrastructure point where it's almost, I would say, they have to move material, right? Because they've added equipment, they've added processing capability, they've added to keep up with the market. Now the market does this on them. You gotta keep that shit moving. So if you don't feel comfortable with the sale price, there's probably somebody out there that does, because they got to move scrap. So if you got a good home for your material, it's in your best interest to make sure you got that ability to move that material.
I would tend to agree. That's for sure. I'm going to switch gears a little bit and talk about, we hinted on copper. And so copper's down, I think, from yesterday's price was around 5%, 5.5%. Zorba, to me, I think it's down also around 6-7%. I really keep a close eye on these, because I think both copper and Zorba are super important to shredders, because that what they get on the eddy currents from the copper and the Zorba is so vital to their profitability. So with both these prices being down, it's gonna be hard for shredders. If the market goes down, $30, it's going to be hard for them not to follow that plus some, just to make up some ground here on the Zorba and copper pricing.
And when do you think this is kind of more of a historical question? If you don't know the answer, that's fine. At what point in, like, when did shredders start more calculating in this price of Zorba to their, what they could pay for shreddable materials? That when they added, like when shredders became like a lot more plentiful in, say, certain areas? I mean, at what point? I mean, I don't own a shredder. I sell to a few different ones. And it feels like it probably depends on the market, depends on the competitiveness. But I mean, I wonder when did that really become about, when people really started focusing on the Zorba side of the shred feed, not just using it as like a gravy, but actually calculating that into their buy price.
Well, I think, to me, in my, so I've been good night 500, 600, 700 yards in my career, and so I've seen some of the best shredding equipment out there. There's two guys that come to the top of my mind, and then when I think about that technology and the cost of that technology, it's to me the last 5 years, it feels like it's became more affordable or more on a scale. And so where they could recover enough material out of those machines that it could pay for itself very quickly. And I think it's kind of fed itself, where the ferrous is kind of a loss leader, and then the non-ferrous is where you're actually going to make a penny, from my perspective. Now, every market's a little different. I think in the Midwest, like in Ohio, I'll tell you, it'd be, from the pricing I'm hearing, it'd be very tough to make a buck just on ferrous alone.
But I mean, ultimately, if you're, let's say, on average, I mean, I think it depends on your, the grade and material you're running, but at least from everything I've ever kind of understood, you're still probably anywhere from 20, 18% non-ferrous coming out of your shredded goods, like on a percentage basis. I mean, but also the technology on like the auto processing side and everything else, has gotten a lot better, where people are really picking those cars apart before they deliver them to a shredder. So that number has to swing wildly.
Yeah, and I think that's what we're going to see in the next decade is that as people become more educated about the scrap industry. I mean, from the pick and pull yards to shredding yards, our process is very efficient. This whole
Yeah.
industry is extremely efficient. They don't waste a lot. I mean, even from used gas,
Yeah.
so I think people are going to be impressed with just how resourceful a lot of the whole scrap chain is.
Interesting. Yeah. I'm always curious, like on the history of when was that like switch made, right? Like, because then you can like look for those dynamics and say, let's start looking across the board at other commodities or other industries and say, okay, at what point does the technology begin then to tweak,
Well,
price models?
I think it used to be this is pre my time, but it used to be like you'd slow down your shredder to try to make the material smaller because there's just so much loose copper in your regular auto shred. Right. And then they came up with gamma shred where they'd run it over this X-ray and they could tell you at least how much copper was in it. Right. And they would try to get it below. Well, now it feels like shredders have gotten better. The trommels have gotten better. And then therefore, when I say better, I mean, they make the material smaller. Right. And then that increases just your downstream process and all your eddy current. So again, I feel like this industry has forced a lot of recyclers to get super efficient, super resourceful, and they've done it.
So there you go. If you want to get into the shredding business, you might hit up Chad. He knows he's seen a few operations in real time. He could tell you tell you the efficiencies of how it works out, at least in the markets he's seen.
Yeah, and what's interesting is I see a lot of heats, right, directly impacted from all different shredders all across the North America. So it is really fascinating, the shredding technology and how different each shredder can be based on that operator and how they run it.
Yeah, who's trying to cram the most junk through it? Who's trying to run? I always think of a shredder as like a similar to like a wire chopping line. It's like shit in, shit out. You put in good material through it, and you manage the process, and overfeed it and try and jam out as many tons as you can at the back end. You're just it just goes back to quality, And I think, which kind of leads me to the next thing, and when we do this podcast, we do it from say a steel mill buyer's perspective and a scrap, seller's perspective, and that's what I love. You bring a dynamic to the table and information that to get people aware of. When you're trying to make a deal on your material, like understand the way the steel mill, buyer's process in his mind, what he's thinking, right? And what he's trying to project and what he sees. And on the scrap side, when these markets come, it's even more in your favor to make a quality product because there's going to be more material available in the market. And your ability to make a quality HMS 1-2 package, your quality to make a good number 2 bundle or number 1 bundle clean shred, like quality is imperative at 2 points in the spectrum, the way I see it. When the price is really high because there's a lot of demand, quality becomes important because the price is high enough that they're paying more attention. When the price gets really low and there's not a lot of demand, quality becomes probably, I would argue, to say even more important because you now have more competitors, people that are selling material into that mill or that want to sell material to that mill. So quality is about to become even more important than it was at, say, a mid-level price where it's a more sustainable pricing. As the market drops out, people have the steel mills, they have more people trying to sell than material they can actually consume. You better be on point, which all the years leading up to that point, if you've just been making shitty packages and getting away with it because the steel mill had demand, that eventually that comes home to roost. And now you're gonna pay the piper. So it's important to always keep in mind quality. Whether you run a shredder or a shear or whatever, ship quality, and you'll for the most part should have a home for your material.
Yeah, and that I think that's the ugly truth about any commodities market was when things are hot, quality just typically the yards are trying to get it in, get it out, right? They're less focused on quality. And when the markets are lower, you see a lot of market rejects and you see everybody get more focused on quality. And so it's just, I think that's not only true in the scrap industry. I think it's true in other industries as well.
Yeah, 100%.
All right. So, nickel is down too. Now this market is a little bit wonky in that I don't know if a lot of people trust LME, but are you seeing stainless prices come down quite a bit too?
Yeah, they came off. I saw some 304 stainless prices dip into like the high 50s, which I hadn't seen that for a while. And they kind of bounced back, coming up into the low 60s again. So that thing's trying to find a plane, like, it's trying to plane out, I feel like. But yeah, I mean, you saw when you start seeing high 50s, you're like, oh golly, like it's because stainless is such a tough product to process, right? I mean, it's heavy, it's nasty, it's hard to bale, it's hard to just deal with. So you start seeing stainless price in the 50s at today's operating costs, that can be kind of worrisome as an operator.
I see. All right, so I think we've already seen shred feed pricing come down some. I think the fast markets is down $20 month over month, and I think this continues. What do you think?
I think you're probably pretty right. If I had to make a bet, I feel like that you start adding in, what Zorba's doing, and then the steel mill demand and whatnot. I think it's a tough market to be a seller into right now. You don't hold much leverage.
All right, last chart for you. This is the most important one, I think. Save the best for last. So I was actually surprised on how little it was down. So Turkey, and we're looking at the 80-20 Turkey chart. And so last month it was, I think at the beginning of May, is right around 401. Today it's somewhere in the neighborhood of 390, 391. So it's really only down $10. And so, but I think the bigger component is not the price, is the lack of volume. And the lack of volume, particularly off the East Coast.
Yeah, and this time of year, that market's typical, right? It kind of slows down. I mean, trend wise, it usually picks up a little more steam towards the latter part of the year, if you're going to pick up any steam. But I don't deal much with the Turkey. Obviously that's a more East Coast deal. I mean, I think that's what drives that price a little harder, maybe the South, Gulf Coast, East Coast. But I think you need a strong Turkish market to pull tons out of the U.S., right? Which then creates a little more demand on the domestic side. And if you're not getting that, then you're in a tough spot. So, and if it's like you said, it's not necessarily the price. And I don't necessarily also believe that people are holding tons back either. I feel like the domestic market's been strong enough. They've been able to move those tons domestically. So maybe the volume hasn't needed to move off the coast. But if the domestic market slows down enough, you might see the volume move up with the price come down.
I think that's a good point. And I think, to me, when you think about primes and all the imports are coming in, you think about the lack of volume on the export, even though, pricing becomes less of a point at that standpoint. So just those two factors would create an oversupply, and then you create lower demand market, man. Things are bearish.
They are, man. They are. Every dog has its day in the sun, right? And right now it's definitely a bearish camp, but optimistically, the future's bright for our industry, but I will say that it could be a long, slow slog to the summer. And so half the time I give advice so that maybe I'll take it for myself. If I say it out loud, eventually I'm like, yeah, maybe you should take your own advice, asshole. So I do believe if you've got good homes for your scrap, manage your quality. I think the takeaways for me are manage your quality, take care of business, make sure your costs are in line, and make sure you're not overpaying for scrap that you can't process and get rid of in a timely manner, or else you're going to be holding the bag on potentially a lower July market as well. So be cautious of how long you sit on material, as far as like how long you're willing to sit on it, knowing that the trend right now is not necessarily optimistic in our favor on the scrap seller side.
I love it. So many golden nuggets right there. Thank you.
All right, sir. Well, thanks for all your great charts. I'm about to, if you have a couple more like this, we're just going to be a Bears versus Bears podcast. I don't have any bullish points left, but like I said, we'll get our day back in the sun. But for now, the trend's not going our way. Keep the scrap moving out there, guys.
You had plenty of fun in the first quarter. It's all good.
And everybody, like I said, everybody gets their day. All right, Chad. We'll talk to you next month, man.
Thanks, Brett.
All right.